Hello, and welcome to this exclusive special interview with MeCo TV. I am Professor Funmilola Fagbamila. I am an instructor of Pan-African Studies at Cal State LA. I am an original and founding member of the Black Lives Matter movement, and I'm an LA-based playwright. Today we have with us Omoyele Sowore, who is the presidential aspirant of the 2019 Nigerian elections. And today we'll be discussing with him his ideas, his philosophy, his platforms, his plans on how to transform the political condition of Nigeria and to shift the current power dynamics. And we're especially grateful to have him here. And we're going to get into that conversation right after a quick break. So, Omoyele Sowore, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for bringing me here.
So glad to have you. We're going to have a wonderful conversation, but to give a bit of context before we get into discussion, I want to note a bit about your past and your history. You were a student union leader during your time at University of Lagos, and you are the founder of a media movement, not only a news outlet of Sahara reporters, but a media movement where you were doing a great deal of important political work at the time. Can you please elaborate on your contributions thus far?
So for 29 years or over 29 years, Nigeria had serious problems. And when I came on the stage as a young person, as a freshman at the University of Lagos, Nigeria's biggest problem was forcing the military out of power. We wanted a transition from military rule to democratic practice. And I was part of the young people in the country that embarked on a series of protests against the military, eventually forcing them to organize democratic elections since 1993. And soon as that election was concluded, or when it was about to be concluded, they nullified the election. And my trajectory in life changed. And at that point, I had just a few more weeks to graduate from college. But everything just went upside down. We embarked on a series of protests that led to my expulsion from the university, led to my detention many times. And after all that was concluded, in 1999, Nigeria returned to democratic rule. Well, maybe you say civilian rule, but not necessarily democratic rule.
Got you. Got you.
Yes. So, and after that, I came to the U.S. I had my master's degree at Columbia University. And when I was finishing up at Columbia University, it occurred to me that the media had been weakened by what I would say is the internal contradictions of democracy.
Yes.
That, we used to have a vibrant media, and when the politicians came on board on the stage, they went and bought over the vibrant media that we used to know or have.
Right.
And after that, we just started getting what typically you say you're getting here in terms of media. It's just like a lot of content with no substance.
Yes.
And at that point, I decided that internet was something that could be used to create a movement. So I started a media movement through Sahara reporters. And the idea was simple: to have citizens report on social political events happening in the country, particularly corruption. That was a major obstacle to political, economic, and cultural progress in Nigeria at that time. So this platform started 12 years ago, became very, very popular a few years later, and became very competitive, and to the extent that we were able to tell our stories on the world stage. And I was able, through this movement, to tell the story of Nigeria, whether good or bad, competing with the likes of CNN, BBC. When I started, it used to be that if a story was broken by Sahara reporters, people would say, well, we haven't seen it on BBC and Reuters yet. Right. A few years later, if Reuters broke a story about Nigeria, I said, well, why is it not on Sahara reporters?
Right.
So, and that's pretty much what I've done. But, this pitched me against a very, very powerful, a lot of very powerful political interests in Nigeria. I became a threat to the system on a grander scale than I was when I was a student activist.
Right.
Yes.
And a lot of Nigerians are very excited about what you're doing because we haven't seen this before.
Yes.
You said that you became a threat to the current establishment and the past establishment because you plan on shifting the entire infrastructure essentially as it exists.
Yes, almost revolutionary politicking is the way I'll describe it. That, you come from, according to them, I come from nowhere. And just started changing not only the conversation about politics, but I was starting to change the narrative.
Yeah.
You see, I have a theory about, democratic development, which came through as I was doing the campaign this time around. And I said that, for democracy to consolidate itself anywhere on the continent of Africa, it has to start. When it started in 1999, I was there.
Okay.
Yes. When you have a democratic practice, for it to be consolidated further, it goes through a second stage, what I call the demogabalization of democracy. You don't allow a big man to continue in office beyond the term limits. So we had a third term political manipulation that was going to be done by President Olusegun Obasanjo at that time, and we fought against it. And that helped more people in Nigeria to believe in democracy, that okay, we can have democracy that has term limits and big men can be defeated.
Yes.
The next was to have minorities have their way, as opposed to having just only a say in a democratic setting.
Okay.
And it happened also with former President Goodluck Jonathan becoming president after his principal died a few years after he was hospitalized in Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
The fourth stage is for democracy to experience a transfer of power from a major ruling party to an opposition party. Turns out that I was actually there too with Sahara reporters, reporting instantaneously as results of that election was coming out in 2015. And that is why Nigerians believe that big parties can be defeated.
Yes.
And the last stage is where we're at now. And I happen to be championing it, that there must be an intergenerational transfer of power.
Yes.
The old guards must be necessarily defeated, abandoned, or retired.
Yes.
So that Nigeria's democratic experiment or experience can have an injection of fresh ideas, fresh blood, and it can experience the dynamism that can make us stand tall in the world. So that's what we're championing now.
And there's gonna, be some resistance to that.
Absolutely, there is already a resistance. There's been huge resistance to that.
Absolutely.
But for me, the real resistance is against oppression.
Absolutely.
We are the ones that are leading the resistance against oppression by, speaking out loudly against the practices of corruption, of disenfranchisement. What I describe our process as, Nigeria has got 6 geopolitical zones.
Okay.
And our group has formed the 7th most powerful geopolitical zone right now. We are in the zone of the disenfranchised, the abandoned, the abused, the decimated and desecrated people of Nigeria. And we're about to strike, whether they like it or not.
Okay.
Yes.
So you have come out very plainly and strongly about combating the corruption, saying that you have every intention on shifting the way that checks and balances work within the country.
That's right.
Right. And so when we talk about corruption and all that it has caused in terms of the lack of proper resources and funds being made available to the people of Nigeria, one of the biggest effects of that has been a rising unemployment rate.
Yes.
So you can talk about addressing corruption. One of the hugest issues is going to be unemployment. How can we tackle, for what I understand, is at like a 19.7% unemployment rate, if we're talking about a study.
It depends on who you're talking to.
Okay.
Yes. So you cannot, our problem is not that we don't have enough resources. Our resources have been stolen.
Absolutely.
And where they're not been stolen, they are mismanaged. Because unfortunately, we've been voting for dummies to run a country of dynamic people, and we keep making that mistake. But now we've reached a level where we have to take stock of what we have and then have people who can manage those resources so that they can percolate to the ordinary people. Nigeria has been at the behest of the enemies of the people running Nigeria over these years. And quite honestly, they haven't changed. there's a joke in Nigeria that we don't study history in Nigeria because our ancestors are still ruling us.
Well.
You know, the president of Nigeria is older than the Nigerian state, and Nigeria's got the youngest population in terms of, on the continent of Africa. 70% of Nigerians are below the age of 30, but our president is, depending on who you're talking to, officially 75 years old.
Right.
And some said it's 80-something years old because his younger sister celebrated her 82nd, and the president is supposed to be older than her.
Okay.
That's a conversation for another time. I don't know how they do the calculation, but so for us to get past unemployment, we must invest in young people, and to invest in young people, Nigeria must start investing in a lot of things. Most importantly, developing infrastructure, addressing, for example, the power issue, and addressing them in ways that are also in consonant with the way the world is moving. For example, we want to bring in 4.5 gigawatts of electricity through solar.
Yeah.
And nobody's talking about that because they don't understand it. These analog brain leaders don't understand solar energy. There's talk in the past.
Absolutely.
We want to double Nigeria's road infrastructure, or even add more. We want to have trains run around the country, the same way the Chinese have been able to do there. And we know that there are resources there. Our leaders are stealing over $5 billion every year.
Right.
We want to increase the purchasing power of workers by increasing the minimum wage to go to a level that we refer to as a living wage.
Right.
And we want to bring about health in such a way that we democratize primary health care.
Okay.
So that, something as simple as being able to check your blood pressure wherever you might find yourself in the country, it's not available right now. We don't have universal, healthcare system. We don't even have a means of having people register within an institutionalized healthcare system in a country. Right? We have plenty of land, hectares of land that we're not cultivating because nobody is interested, in buying, say, tractors. Instead, they're buying, SUVs.
So you're talking about all of these things that are missing in terms of even just the crumbling infrastructure of the healthcare system, as well as the educational institutions.
Absolutely, yes.
And so I've, done a great deal of research on your perspective and your platform, and you said that a lot of the politicians themselves don't trust the educational system within Nigeria to send their own children
They
there.
don't send the children to the president of Nigeria don't have any of his kids going to a Nigerian school.
Right.
That tells you something. You cannot find a governor. In fact, you cannot find a county official in Nigeria who would send the children to a public school.
Right.
So, if you don't believe in the public education system, enough to send the children there, that why would they even think about improving it?
But you said that the problem is not necessarily that we don't have the resources to address all of these issues. We have the resources, that there has been a colonial exploitative relationship with outside, particularly European political entities, where there's been a draining of the resources. And that has also contributed to the ethnic strife. You've also said that you're not trying to be an ethnic champion.
Not at all.
Right?
I don't have any ethnic bone in my body. And as long as these things are not addressed, by way of social justice, economic justice, they will continue to be available as tools to divide people.
Absolutely.
That's the only purpose they serve.
Absolutely.
Because you think about it, the same Nigerian person that is killing for his ethnic group, when they come to the US, they don't even want you to know that they come from Nigeria because they're trying to assimilate culturally.
Right.
So, but at home, they're there, like, oh, I'm Yoruba, I'm Hausa. But at the end of the day, when you're hungry, it doesn't care.
It doesn't matter.
When you're sick,
Right.
When mosquitoes are biting you, they don't ask you your ethnic, group before they do that.
Right,
Yes.
right,
So,
right.
and, when accidents are happening on the highways, they don't separate Yorubas from Hausas or Igbos.
Right.
So that's the sad part, and a lot of people don't understand this. And part of why I'm doing this is also to elevate the conversation, so that for people to understand where we're going, they need to move out of the usual cultural, traditional, religious boxes into which they've been put.
Absolutely.
To start having progressive discussions about the future.
Absolutely.
That was why, last 2 weeks we had a conversation about the role of, say, cannabis in Nigeria. Nobody would talk about cannabis.
Right.
In
Everything
Nigeria,
is so
it used to be like,
wraps.
wow, cannabis.
Right.
But fella was talking about it,
Right.
40, 50 years ago. He was using it, and they could see the effect. It wasn't addictive. He was, promoting some kind of wisdom and philosophy that they've never seen before. But the reaction was knee-jerk. Oh, how could fella be talking against us? It's because he's smoking cannabis. They went to the radio stations and banned his music from being played.
Right.
But today, they can't stop the force of his philosophical prophecies
Right.
that said, look, all these people are going to become irrelevant.
Right.
But as long as Nigerians don't get it right,
Right.
we're also going to be backward.
Fela was talking about, these philosophies that he presented to the Nigerian people about the way that essentially colonialism and in essence neo-colonialism or a contemporary colonialism still is a force that drains Nigeria's resources.
Yes.
Now when we talk about that and Nigeria being what could be considered a mono-product economy and that product being oil, how do we begin to shift the conversation or the relationship between Nigeria and oil companies? Because that's extremely important.
So, it's a little bit more complicated than just products.
Okay.
It's also about mindset.
Yes.
The mindset, is also economic, it's international. Even if Nigeria had nothing to sell to the world, they had other means of controlling Nigeria. So you think about this. Nobody's having conversation about how much Nigeria is contributing to the world through one oil company, say Chevron.
Yeah.
But the conversation is always about how much America gave to Nigeria in
Right.
foreign aid.
Right.
And so when you're having conversations that are driven by such very, I would say dislocated means of properly assessing contributions of countries into the international market, then you can't get the truth. The truth is that why is nobody talking about how much Chevron, for example, is making in profits from Nigeria? And the conversation is about, yes, we gave Nigeria $300 million last year to fight malaria and cough, and we bought them mosquito nets.
Yes.
And nobody is coming out and say, well, Chevron made $16 billion from Nigeria last year. Shell made
Correct.
so much amount of money. NI, which is Italian oil company. Every company has got a representative in Nigeria, and we're not having that conversation. And as long as we're not having that conversation, Nigeria cannot get its due from sales of even a monoproduct. But it is not that it's not that monoproduct that is a problem. It's the mono mindset.
Yes.
That's a problem.
Absolutely. And you're talking about a mentality shifting. And so, you have addressed the mentality of the kind of paternalistic mentality that exists in the current administration and administrations of the past. And so in shifting the mentality that is going to be dominant and present within the administration once you get in office, how do you begin to encourage Nigerian people to shift their mentality? Because again, we're still very divided in terms of ethnicity, in terms of religious philosophy. There's a great deal of divisiveness, and you're saying if we shift the mentality to one that is more unified, to one that is not necessarily considering just oil as our only significant resource, what other types of mentalities need to shift? Because there's a great deal of, Nigeria is just corrupt and it's just corrupt, and a kind of apathy, right? A political apathy that oftentimes take over. But young people have a different mentality.
Yes.
And you've championed for young people.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's a lot more than just economic, like I mentioned before. A lot of it is cultural.
Yes.
A lot of it is religious.
Yes.
And as long as people are trapped in those places, where you think that, your government don't owe you certain responsibility, but God does.
Absolutely.
You have a problem.
Right.
Understanding your rights and the responsibilities of your government.
Absolutely.
For me, the solution is to find people who have been around the world that's come to understand how the world operates. I'm not one of the people who will throw at you this whole notion that Nigeria is corrupt. Yes, it is true that Nigeria is corrupt because there's primitive accumulation of wealth by a greedy minority. But the most corrupt street in the world is actually based in New York. It's called Wall
Wall
Street.
Street?
Yes.
Wall
You know,
Street.
and nobody's having
Yeah.
that conversation,
Yeah.
you know. And when you find resources disappearing from Nigeria, it disappears first through those streets,
Right.
you know. But if you don't, for me, if you don't change the team running the African continent, you cannot change the international conversation.
Absolutely.
Yes, but when you bring your A team to the game, people will start respecting you, and there are things that they just can't say to you
Absolutely.
if they know that you have people who can think and who can act and who can deliver on behalf of their people.
Absolutely.
And for you to get that external respect, you have to respect yourselves internally too. And respect starts from proper distribution of wealth, you know, giving education to your people, doing what is right by your people. And the way to look at it is to look at that small island right there in Cuba, 90 miles from America, that delivered the best education to its people. And for several years, they just kept fighting this war of the mind. And right now, they're in control of the mind of a Cuban. And Cubans have self-dignity
Right.
and respect. And they can hold their own against anyone in the world.
Right.
Even when they're hungry,
Absolutely.
they don't lose their minds.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So, you know, we have Omoyele Sowore here, and he really is presenting to us the possibility of transforming Nigeria's condition. And so it's largely important that Nigerian people take this as serious as it needs to be taken to make the right decision when it comes time to vote next year. Clearly, he is coming from a mentality that is completely different from what we've seen before. In just a small amount of time that I've researched Sowore, I've seen that he has done his research, he's done his studying, he's invested in the possibility and the reality of the possibility of transforming the condition of Nigeria in a way that we have not seen ever before. I want to go ahead and say that we have not seen ever before because of the way that colonialism has so desperately challenged us infrastructurally, politically, economically. We have an option now to address that in a really constructive way. So do your research. Don't just take what you've heard here and run with that, but continue to do your research and make a good decision next year. We're glad that all of you chimed into this conversation, all of you streaming in from Instagram and Facebook. Thank you for watching. Omoyele Sowore, we're glad to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I'll be happy to come back here again when I come to LA.
Absolutely.
You know, but you know, just as you have Hollywood, you now have Nollywood. So,
Yeah.
And there'll be more of that
Yeah.
when we win the election next year. There'll be this whole shift and the paradigm of the way we think of ourselves. And like I said, and I want to say this finally.
Yes,
You know,
absolutely.
if you think of Africa as a pistol facing down, Nigeria is a trigger. And you can look at it. So we get it right in Nigeria, Africa gets it right, and the black race will get back its glory.
I believe that.
Thank you.
Thank you.